All right, I'm going to be talking about internal communication. You can see the title of my presentation, Connecting the Heart to Science. Internal communication to cultivate compassion, culture, and community. And so to get started this afternoon, I thought I would talk about what I see as some of the big overarching trends that are framing how we approach internal communication today. These are just my thoughts, and just wanted to share these with you. And the first thought comes from a recent meeting with the IPR Board of Trustees that met in Dallas about 6 weeks ago. And as we were meeting in Dallas, we were talking about what's going on right now in internal communication, what should we be thinking about? And one of the Board of Trustees said, I think right now is best described as a period of great reflection. And I thought that was oh so smart, and we talked about what that means, because I think we're all reflecting right now after being in a pandemic for nearly 20 months. What does my work mean to me? Do I want to continue in this position? Maybe I can work a little less for a little less money, because I've seen now with COVID that it's actually kind of nice to hang out at home and be with loved ones a little more. Maybe I don't want to do that commute anymore and look for somewhere else, and I want to work from home. I think that many people are changing jobs right now. They're changing industries, and I think we're all reflecting on what is next and what do I want to do next. I think also, as we all know, is we are facing increasing polarization, both politically. We're looking at this with social issues right now, maybe fueled by the Black Lives Matter movement. We're talking about climate change, other big issues happening right now. Looking at this with health and COVID, the vaccine, mask requirements, yes or no. We're a very polarized nation right now, and that is absolutely informing what we do in internal communication. We also know, as one of our speakers will talk about today, is increasing expectations for DEI. We all know that we are all doing a lot of work right now. I can say that here where I work at TCU, we've been working for 5 years. This is the #1 commitment we have right now at our university. And this is informing, again, how we communicate with our employees. And then finally, we know that we are working with a changing work environment where people have the option to maybe work full-time in the office. Are we full-time remote, or are we doing a hybrid model? That's impacting how we work today, and that's a big part of our jobs in internal communication. And so when we think about internal communication, this is something that academics and scholars have studied for a long time. It's a robust area of research. We see people in communication, public relations, and business studying internal communication. And when we think about how we have conceptualized and defined internal communication, there should be no surprises here. We have traditionally called this communication between an organization and employees that has the potential to foster communication, trust, and engagement among employees. Others have written that this is a management function designed to exchange information. A big emphasis on information in our academia and literature to foster understanding. When we think about our purposes, if I work in IC, we're providing information, we're creating a sense of community, aligning employees with the purpose and goals of our organization, and we're building relationships. We'll have a lot of slides. There you go. Another thing we might consider right now in the likes of internal communication is employee engagement. That's something we all talk about in public relations and in internal communication. And looking here at a Gallup workplace poll from 2021, we can see there in the top green line that actually our engagement numbers have slightly increased during COVID. They've kind of gone up and down, but actually just slightly uptick just a little bit. Right now we're at around 36% of employees say that they are engaged. In terms of the number of employees who are highly disengaged, that's hovering around 14%. So we know we have roughly a 2.8 to 1 ratio of engaged to highly disengaged employees. Engagement, again, remains a top focus for us in public relations. A few years ago, a few of my colleagues, Dr. Rita Menn from the University of Florida, Michelle Ewing, from Kent State University, we became interested in engagement and looking at the role of internal social media. That's dialogical, it's two-way communication, it's more personal. Might that play a role in building employee engagement? So I'm going to briefly just do a snippet of this study to talk about that. We looked again at employees' perspectives looking at internal social media. Why would they be motivated to use internal social? And when I say internal social media, that might be proprietary, something that you've developed, or it could be something like Yammer or Slack or Facebook, something along those lines. What is this role in creating transparency, identification, and engagement? Again, so there are those motivations, and then we wanted to look at a model to link those variables together to see what's going on here from a research perspective. So just briefly, we did a survey with 1,150 employees from across 17 industries, and one of the criteria we had was that the employees had to have used internal social media by their companies. When we asked the employees how they access that internal social media, 81% said they access through computers, 54% said by phone, and 27% use tablets, and they could select more than one option clearly. We talked to 61% of employees had management positions, and we had a pretty equal breakdown of men versus women. So if you look at why people are motivated to use internal social media, look at that number one choice. It was asked on a scale from 1 to 7, by the way, a Likert scale. But all of the means were pretty similar, but around a little bit higher than 4 points. But first and foremost, it's getting information. There should be no surprises here, right? We use internal to find out what's going on with our organization, getting insight, advice, sharing knowledge and information. Second, it's to social integration and socialization. We're connecting with employees, creating that sense of belonging. And third, we're doing it for empowerment. We're looking for feedback, ideas, voicing concerns, and interacting with our leaders. When we take a quick look at this model, this is a very short overview of this project. We can see here a statistical model that shows us the science behind internal communication. And in essence, what this model is telling us is that the more our employees are using internal social media, the greater their identification is with the organization. The more transparency they perceive the organization as being more transparent, which in turn leads to greater identification with the organization, which then yields employee engagement. This should be good news to all of us in this room. There's a lot of science out there about internal communication. There's a lot of research. This is just one of many studies being conducted in the last 10 years about IC and the impact that it has on moving the needle in organizations. And so when we talk to our clients and our senior leadership, we know that this stuff works through these kind of models. So that's some research from about 3 years ago. What's changing today with internal communication? I talked briefly about those trends that might be informing internal communication. What do we know about internal communication right now? I guess about a month ago, the IPR Measurement Commission held a roundtable with commissioners, and we had an hour-and-a-half conversation and talked about what are those changes in IC measurement that we see happening right now in organizations. And if you're interested in this, there's a full transcript that's on the website of the IPR. So I'm just going to provide a few snippets from my colleagues who represented agencies and companies and academics and service providers, consultants, who talked about what they think are the biggest changes right now in measurement of IC. And then one of the commissioners, or a few of our commissioners, talked about what they see changing right now is there's more of an integration of HR and PR. That increasingly we're working together in departments and sharing initiatives like wellness programs, mental health, onboarding, culture. That again, there's more of a bearing of these functions, and we're going to continue to see this. A few commissioners talked about what are we really getting at? What is the big picture aha moment with internal communication? And this one commissioner talked about how she thinks it's less, and she's our award winner for tonight, less about examining the impact of communication and more of a proxy of the health of the organization and its culture. And she's arguing that we need to widen the lens of what we conceive of IC and to really think about that bigger impact about culture and health. And I thought that was really great. And in related fashion, someone argued that, really it's helping us, or we're thinking more today about what constitutes IC. And is it really every communication touch point? We've heard this many, many years ago from our friends in IMC who said every data point is communication. Or now we're hearing some of us say the same thing in public relations. It's not just the messaging. It's a broader range of data that we have to look at when we consider what we're doing in IC. Again, that is the impetus for sharing data with many departments like marketing, like HR, and public relations. There's a sense that internal communication can influence brand reputation, and we've talked about this before, but a growing emphasis on the role of employees in impacting a brand, as well as risk mitigation, widening the aperture. Someone talked about the importance of examining employee content on the dark web, because we can look there and look for signals or signs that something may be happening with our trust within our organization. So we need to widen where we look for data as well. And then we had a few people talk about, traditionally we've really looked at IC from a quantitative perspective. We love surveys, we like metrics, digital data. But again, we should never overlook the importance of qualitative research and that deep listening that we need to do to employees as well, to rethink our methods and not to overlook the importance of that good listening and qualitative research. So in lieu of that conversation that our measurement commission had, I also want to let you know that these same conversations are happening in our scholarship. And academics have been asking, what are we doing in terms of measuring and evaluating internal communication? Because there's been such an emphasis on pretty traditional methods, what can we do to get around that and to widen our scope of tools and to think about how we measure from the perspective more of the employee and less about what's in it for the organization. Toward that end, I just share a few just snippets of things that are being discussed in our scholarship of public relations right now. And again, there's been this argument that we have these very linear, very traditional, effectiveness-based views. But some of our academics have argued that we focus more on insight, more on listening, but learning to better understand the role of communicators in providing counsel, education and training, coaching, strategizing, and planning. Someone else has argued that one of the most pressing challenges right now is to develop a conclusive, holistic theory of creating value for the organization from communication. These are big calls out there, and it's easier said than done. Another project I was involved in a few years ago, again with Dr. It was the same, we had a big grant with Rita Mann and Michelle Ewing, is we did some qualitative research and we talked to people in internal communication, and some of the questions that we had were, what objectives do internal communication practitioners have for internal communication? What strategies do we use to create an engaged workplace and improve internal communication? How do we measure employee engagement? And how will internal communication continue to evolve? We talked to 27 practitioners. They had on average 20 years of communication experience, 15 years of internal communication experience. And we talked to 12 men and 15 women. And so on that first question, what objectives do internal communication practitioners have for internal social media and internal communication? And the practitioners that we talked to from a range of corporations and sizes, et cetera, they talked about a range of objectives and strategies. But in addition to the objectives to create awareness, these are things we've always done. We're creating awareness, we're creating understanding of the strategy, the direction. Communicators also talk about ways that they try to create this intangible value. And I'll show you some examples. We heard things that people are trying to create these objectives of how do we contribute to company culture. Seeing the opportunity and I have here kind of a theme, and I have a quote here to show you what people were talking about, a representative quote. Seeing the opportunity to tap into the people who always make the culture happen, and a social tool is really going to be like a lighter fluid for it. We seek to build community. We're trying to create confidence among our employees. Look how employee focused these objectives are. We're creating collaboration and connection among employees and leaders. We're encouraging employees to share their voice. And we're trying to increase employee recognition. When we ask them about strategies, how do they actually do this? What's their game plan? Practitioners talked about storytelling, helping employees understand the mission, vision, and values, customizing the information to when employees want to receive that information, but they also talked about this, the more intangibles. Again, the practice and purpose, fostering communities of practice and purpose, and someone wrote or said, we have communities of purpose, less like professional practices and more like identity communities like the LGBTQ community. We're treating employees as people, treating their people as individuals and coaching and stretching them. They are central to our solutions. Providing opportunities for employees to become involved, creating experiences around organizational values, helping people to enjoy their jobs. We want them to make this a great place to work and be where you spend most of your day. Another strategy, listening and improving. We need to know what we need to do differently by listening and holding on to our sacred values. So how are we measuring internal communication? Again, of course, we're never going to let go of this. We're looking at KPIs. We're using engagement surveys, readership numbers, channel studies, digital analytics. But we're also doing these things to widen our toolkit. Our employees' confidence in our strategy and our leadership, whether they're growing both personally and professionally. Are our employees leaving richer, not just financially? People aren't spending 30 years in an organization anymore, but do you leave someone who's grown more personally and professionally? Do the employees feel empowered and enabled? And do they feel motivated to innovate? And then finally, our last research question, how will this continue to evolve? Maybe no big surprises here, but again, our practitioners are telling us it's becoming more conversational, interactive, dialogical, and humanized. Our employees are content collaborators and social ambassadors, using multimedia and mobilization, behavior and data-driven. And there's that blurred line we already heard about from our commissioners, the blurred line between internal and external communication. One way when we think about the results of this study and as we move forward, there's a theory that we use in academia called social capital theory. And it's just a different way of thinking about how we might think about internal communication and the value that we provide. This is a theory that's used in many disciplines, and social capital are the resources that are inherent within our networks of relationships, which are facilitated by communication. And the theory tells us that organizations can create, maintain, and use relationships, and in the long run, we achieve our organizational goals. If we take some of the stuff that we looked at in our project, in our study, this is a more complicated theory that I don't need to get into too much right now, but really it tells us that we have structure in our organizations, we have relationship components, and we have communication. And when those components are managed correctly, we achieve our organizational outcomes that are both intangible and tangible. So again, that's another way to think about the value that we do in internal communication. So again, if we come back and kind of round this project, this presentation up, here we are today in 2021, it's almost 2022. I started off with this. I think one of the most important things I take away from all this is that we are always going to need to strive to achieve organizational goals and business outcomes, increased sales, reputation, relevance, risk avoidance, employee engagement. But we also need to recognize that we need to keep an equal eye out for our employees. And when we focus the ball on the employees themselves, those things will naturally occur. I showed you a study at the beginning of the project that shows you that it works, right? Our business outcomes are achieved when we focus on employees. They're not mutually exclusive. I love this study from the Harvard Business Review that recently came out, and it's about joy. People intrinsically seek joy, right? We're in a joyous season right now. And joy connects people more powerfully than any other human experience. In this article, and you can look this article later if you're interested, from Harvard Business Review, says we need to make joy a priority at our workplaces. 90% of employees expect to feel joy at their jobs. Only 37% do, and we're right now in the great reflection period. I recently shared this case with my own students at TCU about a company that uses joy, and this is a company we probably all listen to music on Spotify. They have 7,000 employees around the globe. They have a work from anywhere program, so you can work pretty much where you want. They have a newsletter called The Note that focuses on many components of joy of what the Harvard Business Review article talked about. They acknowledge their employees. They create harmony or collaboration and impact. They let employees know how their job makes a difference. And those are the three primary drivers of joy, according to the Harvard Business Review. When you click on the newsletter, it plays different songs depending on the day, using Spotify. They have a heart and soul mental health program. But they're a great example of a company that uses both science and data to cultivate compassion, culture, and community. They're not mutually exclusive. I work at an organization, TCU. We have roughly 12,000 students. We have 2,300 employees. And like most universities, we have been hit hard by the pandemic. And in the past 20 months, we've had to decrease our operating budget by 30%. We're a private university that was positioned on high touch, in-person classes, small classes. Well, the pandemic pretty much changed all that for us. And with decreasing enrollments because of the birth rates of where we are right now and applications to universities, our operating budget, the pandemic, switching to having to teach online, it's been a hard time for us at TCU, and many academics would tell you that's probably happening at their universities as well. And I've been living this and looking at how our leadership at TCU responds to this pandemic from an internal communication perspective. Because really what everyone is talking about is how our management is dealing with the pandemic and responding to faculty and staff. More than anything else, that is what we are talking about amidst this pandemic. And I think that's true of all employees right now looking around. I know we're hopefully moving the corner, but it's been something we all look at. We in my department, we couldn't change, and TCU's done a lot of great things with our IC, but we couldn't change what was happening at the very top. But we could certainly change what was happening in our department. And we had faculty who were managing 3 small children at home while trying to work full time. We had faculty who were losing loved ones to COVID, like all of us. We were having to learn how to teach online, although none of us had ever done that. So again, we tried. We had a great leader in our department who really focused on showing compassion, trying to foster our culture, having fun at our faculty meetings, remote, wearing silly hats, and letting people have just a little more latitude in how we approached our jobs, realizing we were going to get through this. Fast forward 20 months later, what are people talking about in academia? Am I going to stay at my university? I've had a few people, not just from TCU, from other places, say, I'm going to look for a job where I'm going to ask the people, how did you treat your faculty during the pandemic? Okay, that's the thing that we're talking about. So again, at the end of the day, we can look at all the data and all the science. We know it works, but we're going to focus on our compassion, culture, and community. There you go. That's it.